Well, better late than never. Here comes my review of all the books I read in November of 2023. Yeah, it's a bit later than I meant to get this video posted, but true to form, the holidays have delivered one demand on my time after another, and this was just as fast as I could possibly get this video recorded. But hopefully you'll find it worth the wait, because I do think I read some interesting books, and it's time to review them. As always, if you're interested in any of these books, if you want to read them for yourselves, there will be links to purchase them down in the What's It, which is a great way to support my work here on this channel, while also getting yourself something good to read. And also, as always, feel free to use the comments section down below as an informal book club to discuss and share any recommendations of your own. But, because I'm trying to do this as quickly as possible, without any further ado, let's get right to the literature. The first book on the block, so to speak, for this month was by an author I hadn't read before. The book is this book, The Doctor's Demons by Maria Abrams. This is an interesting take on the classic demonic possession story. It follows a child psychiatrist who encountered a demonically possessed child some 5 years ago. But after that case shook up her entire world, she's used her career essentially as a sort of cover story to identify and treat possessed children, and apparently she's gotten quite good at getting rid of the demons. But now, 5 years later, the effects of that first case have come back to haunt her, and it seems her work has attracted the attention of a newer and even more powerful demonic force. One of the things I like about this is that, much like the original Exorcist, the book or the movie, the story focuses less on the possessed child, himself or herself, and more on how the possession affects all of the people surrounding the child. In The Exorcist, that was of course Father Karras. In this novel, that's Dr. Cohen. In that sense, one could argue that this isn't the most original story, because it does have those parallels with such a classic. However, despite the similar themes, the tone and feel of the stories is rather different between this and The Exorcist, and in fact between this and many possession stories. It's a quick read, coming in at just over 200 pages, and even though it covers quite a span of time, it manages to keep the pace up throughout, and I found the characters entirely engaging and relatable, so it was certainly an enjoyable read, although I do feel the conclusion felt a little bit rushed. So, let's say we're off to a strong start this November with The Doctor's Demons. The next one I read was this classic Christmas treasury from Rockpoint, a publishing house called Rockpoint. Admittedly, I read this toward the beginning of November, and that seemed a bit early for reading a Christmas book, but I got this copy in order to write a review, and I wanted to get it done in time for the holiday season, so I started my Christmas reading a little bit early. And of course, now that I'm making this review video, it is already December, so I guess the timing seems to work out well enough. The book, of course, contains Charles Dickens' immortal classic, A Christmas Carol, which is probably my favorite of the various stories included. And I also think it's the longest entry in this particular anthology, but it does also include a variety of other short stories, some poems, and even a handful of holiday songs, complete with sheet music for fairly simple arrangements. A few of the stories were new to me, but most are, as the title suggests, old classics with which I was already familiar. However, though I'd already read the bulk of the tales included in the book, I was pleased with the selections, and the entire lot is attractively presented in this nice little hardcover, so if you're looking for some holiday classics this Christmas season, I think you would do reasonably well with this anthology. Whether or not we call it horror, since this is a horror channel of course, is a more difficult question. Most of the stories are emphatically not horror stories, But we do have tales like A Christmas Carol, which I still claim for our favorite genre, despite what some other people might think. But regardless of whether it's horror or not, I was, let's say, pretty happy with this one. I then embarked upon a rather substantial reread project covering the entirety of the Tarbell course in magic by Harlan Tarbell. And because you can see this is huge, I'm only going to hold up the first volume. This is an 8-volume monstrosity that honestly really is probably the most comprehensive course in magic ever written. It's reasonably old and some of it's outdated, but it really can take a reader from complete beginner who's never done a magic trick in his life all the way to professional magician if you really put in the time to study the entire book. In fact, you could make more than an entire career out of magic only that's just in these books without ever looking at anything else. Not that I would recommend that you should actually do that. So when people ask about getting started in magic, because they know that I do magic, this is always, if not my first recommendation, at least one of my first recommendations. But it had been quite a while since I'd read these books cover to cover. I reference them regularly. I look up individual tricks or techniques or routines or ideas or individual chapters, pages, etc. But it had been some years, I think, I can't remember exactly how many, but it had been some years since I'd read this cover to cover, and I've been in a magical sort of mood lately, so the time seemed right and I reread the whole thing, volume 1 here through volume 8 down here. This is, of course, not directly horror related, though a few of the tricks are easy enough to make quite scary if that's what you wanted to do. And so, because this is a horror channel and not everyone's interested in magic, I'm not going to belabor the point here with a more detailed review. I'm not going to go volume by volume, but I do recommend this to students of magic. So if you're interested in that particular art form, this is a set of books to get. Next up, coming as probably no surprise to anyone who's been following this channel for a while, is another of my own books. This is In the Woods, a Fiction Foundry anthology, edited by yours truly. Obviously, since it's my own book, I'm not going to review it. That would be improper. But I am going to remind y'all to get copies of your own. It's on Amazon and other bookstores, and you can also get signed copies from me at polymathpress.com. It's a collection of short stories that all take place in the woods, and of relevance to people watching this channel, it's probably a little more than half horror stories. It genre hops a bit, but it is horror heavy. Obviously, since I'm the editor, I read this many more than just the one time, and I'm going much further back than just November. I've been reading this and rereading this for many months now. But since it's available now, this is the month in which I've chosen to feature it here in my Reading Roundup videos, largely just in the interest of providing a complete record of what I've been reading, and of course to remind you to get copies of your own because, well, I need to put food on the table and I have all kinds of wonderful things that I want to buy, and every purchase helps me out. Just saying. And now I have to say, this is going to be a pretty short month in terms of my reviews, largely because this Tarbell series took so much time to read. Not only is this long, being 8 volumes of some 400 or so pages each, but because magic books frankly read a lot slower than novels or short stories. But I do still have one more book to cover for this month. Before I do that, let me just remind you, as I must always do, to like, share, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so we can work together on growing our little community of horror-obsessed weirdos even more and even larger in 2024. And if you really want to help me out, buy my books or leave them a review online. But of course you're not here to hear me talk about growing my audience or buying my books, as much as I need to keep saying such things. Rather, you're here to hear my thoughts about other books. And as I said, I do have one more for you. It's another one by Maria Abrams, and it's called She Who Rules the Dead. This is a short little novella coming in at just over 100 pages, and it tells the story of a serial killer who's ritually sacrificing his victims in an attempt to gain some sort of power from some sort of demonic force with which he has reached some kind of agreement. But he doesn't realize that his next would-be victim, the woman he's just kidnapped, isn't human. Rather, she's some kind of supernatural entity who's taken human form, and she's none too happy about what he's been up to. It's actually a really fun read as well, although I don't think it's quite as good as the other Abrams book that I read at the beginning of the month, but it's still pretty good. It does suffer a little bit in that pretty much all of the human characters in the book are either dead, bit players, or completely reprehensible, and the lead character, who is rather likable, isn't particularly relatable to the extent that she's an inhuman being rather than a human being. So I found myself struggling to really emotionally bond with any of the characters on a deep level. Perhaps if the story were expanded a bit to give us more of some of the other characters, I would have liked it even more. But don't get me wrong, I'm not really complaining, because despite that criticism, the book is nevertheless a delight to read. It captures your attention immediately and will keep you going until you turn that last page, and it will leave you wanting more. And I think that's really just about all most of us want from a novel, at least most of the time. Alas, that's all I've got for this month. I did start reading another one toward the end of November, but I didn't quite finish until the beginning of December, so I'm holding that review until I tackle the December ones. But though that book is non-fiction, there are some fairly horrific elements to it, so be sure to stick around for that. In the meantime, as always, take care and stay scared.